truths that are far deeper and more mysterious, that are more important. But Lord, that you would give us insights into the knowledge that we're speaking about tonight. That, Lord, that we would have answers to some questions, but also be able to defend our faith internally and even externally. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it. This is more like teaching a class than like preaching a message. So when I preach, that's what I really love to do. This is, I just want to apologize ahead of time. It's dry, right? It's just a lot of information. So trying your best to kind of amen me as much as you can, even though you might be bored terribly. It's really great information, so let's get into tonight. Last week we really talked about poking holes in evolution. So if you haven't seen that, I see some new faces here tonight. You can go back and watch that. We just poked holes in it, and we found out that serious scientists today no longer believe in evolution. The majority of serious scientists have discredited it and don't believe in classical evolution. So they're starting to invent new kinds of evolution, which they call neo-Darwinism. It's all finds all different forms. But we talked last week about the multiverse, which there's absolutely no scientific evidence that there's infinite numbers of universes, but that's the new thing they're trying to push on us, because mathematically it's impossible for Darwin's evolution to work, and they've kind of come to terms with that. Not to mention the DNA and the intelligent design they're seeing and everything. So one of the other theories that they're playing around with is that aliens have seeded us because they see intelligence everywhere. And that's really what we're going to talk about tonight, is the evidence for intelligent design. And last week I pointed out that if you decide to believe in God, and I'm maybe talking to some people who have been on the fringe and are watching this but have been atheists, if you believe in God, you join the ranks of some of the smartest people to have ever lived. Because you hear sometimes an atheist will say, or an agnostic will say, people who believe in God are ignorant. There's no evidence. And they point to science and say there is no God. And we're not ignorant. We join the ranks of people like Sir Isaac Newton, Galileo, Einstein, Max Planck, some of the greatest artists who have ever lived, Michelangelo, Mozart, world changers like Martin Luther King Jr., George Washington, Joan of Arc, Sojourner Truth. This means people who believe in God cannot be categorized as ignorant or simpletons or blind sheep. These are great people who did great things. So we don't have to kind of feel like that what they're saying is how people view us. It's not. It's the world that often stands with what appears to be a distorted way of thinking. And sometimes we look at how the world thinks and we think, what nonsense. Are they not thinking? Does anyone else ever do that? You're like, the world just doesn't have logic or reason right now. I sometimes say they're out of their minds. And I want to read to you out of Romans chapter 1 and verse 18. It says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness." Verse 19, what truth? "Because what may be known of God is manifest in them." People are suppressing truth that they know about God because it's manifest in them. "For God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." So what he just said there is he said that everybody believes in God. That's what he said. But people are suppressing their knowledge of God, and that's bad. It's wicked. But they do know him, because it actually said in here, because the knowledge of God is actually manifested in them. In other words, we all know somehow inherently that there's a God from the time we're born. We just know. We can look at ourselves, look in the mirror, we're thinking, we're conscious, we can go, there's a God. But the people who don't, this is what the Bible says, that the people who don't believe in God actually believe in God, but they're suppressing it. They're suppressing it, and that's causing unrighteousness, right? And so then there's a response to people who suppress what they believe. It's interesting, like the idea that an atheist actually believes in God. That's interesting to me. And so it goes on to say that and because they can see it, they see what we see. Verse 21, "Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. They didn't start off darkened. They got darkened by rejecting the idea of God, even though they believed in him. And sometimes people do that because they're mad at God. Sometimes tragedy happens, and I find that sometimes I talk to atheists and they're mad at God. When I really dig in, I find out, well, you actually do believe in God. You're just mad at him. You don't like what happened in your life, and you're blaming him for what happened in your life. You're not actually atheist. You're just mad at God. You're just rejecting God. And then what happens, the next step is they get darkened in their thoughts. Why? Because God is light. How am I going to have intelligent reason and thought and wisdom if absent of God? So what happens is their brains start to decay quickly, where they're not making sense with themselves anymore. And it says this, verse 28, and even as they did not retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things that are not fitting. That's verse 28. So, if somebody's suppressing their knowledge of God, that's why they're so mad. And then if you choose to go down this atheist path, it's not long until your brain can't even see what you used to see, understand the things you used to understand. So the reality is the depravity of the mind. So when you say, you look at the world and you say, they're crazy, are they out of their minds? The Bible is saying, yes, they are. They're out of their minds. And the only thing that can help them is what? Light, Jesus. So our job is to what? Tell them that they're crazy? That's not going to work. I know. Debate them about politics or what they're wrong about morality or their character. Debate them. That's what you're supposed to do, because they're going to suddenly go, oh my gosh, I see the light now. No, we give them Jesus. You say, hey, you know what, help me? I got Jesus in my heart. Do you want him? And then all of a sudden the light can come. And it's like the God of the universe suddenly can say into their heart, let there be light, and pull them out of it. Boy, that's a good word, Pastor. Thank you. I started preaching all of a sudden. I shouldn't do this, but I'll do it. I saw on TV during the COVID pandemic in California, there was a guy on a paddleboard in the middle of the ocean, and the police boat came and arrested him. A boat arrested a guy in the middle of the ocean on a paddleboard for breaking COVID regulations. Yeah, because he's going to give somebody COVID by being in the middle of the ocean on a paddleboard by himself. Out of their minds. Crazy. Okay, that was it. So today I want to talk to you about a couple of things. I want to talk to you about evidence for intelligent design. Just looking at the evidence, what God says. Clearly be seen by what has been made. By studying creation, we can see God. And so the first thing I'm going to get into is what's called the finely tuned universe. Can we make a reasonable assertion of design based on evidence? We in a court of law, you can prove things two ways. Scientific method, which means I can test it currently in its natural state or whatever, and get the same result over and over again, so I can prove something scientifically by running a test. But evidence can also be proved in a courtroom by showing historical evidence. By showing, here's the facts that we know, here's the evidence for this case. I can't test it right now in this moment, but what I can do is show you evidence, and in a court of law, you can prove without a reasonable doubt that something is true or not true. And so that's really the direction that I'm coming from here. Renowned atheist Stephen Hawking admitted in his 1988 book, A Brief History of Time, the laws of science, this is what he said, the laws of science as we know them at present contain many fundamental numbers, like the size of the electric charge of the electron, and the ratio of the masses of the proton, and the electron. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. So this atheist man, who's very famous, is saying, it looks like somebody's played around in here to make this possible. His friend, atheist astronomer Fred Hoyle, who coined the phrase Big Bang, he said this: a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests, this is an evolutionist atheist, doesn't like God person. A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with the physics as well as with the chemistry and biology and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. In other words, the idea that we're randomly here and all of this is random is impossible mathematically. That's what he was saying. Hoyle and Chandra, Wickramasinghe, I can't pronounce that very well, but I'm going to post all my notes online, by the way. All my references and everything will be there so you can study it out. In a book called Evolution from Space in 1981 wrote this: the enormous information content of even the simplest living systems cannot, in our view, be generated by what are often called natural processes. There's no way in which we can expect to avoid the need for information. No way in which we can simply get by with a bigger and better organic soup. Remember, they're always trying to figure out how the organic soup made life, but they failed miserably on that. And they wrote, as we ourselves hoped might be possible. The correct position, we think, is an intelligence which designed the biochemicals and gave rise to the origin of carbonaceous life. This is tantamount to arguing that carbonaceous life was were carbon-based life forms. That's what she's saying. That life was invented by non-carbonaceous intelligence. So they're conceding that something intelligent got us all here. They just still refused to call that intelligence our God. Symbiotic systems that are in harmony tell us that this was put together by intelligence, that this can't be random. We see so many things in our planet, our solar system, down at the cellular level, all the way to the largest of levels, galaxies and universes, the universe. We see all these systems are flowing perfectly in unison and harmony, and many of them depend on each other to work. And all this harmony is telling us that something created all this. Small changes in our system balances have devastating effects. How many have ever heard of the disappearing bees? This was a big thing over the last 10 years. The bees are disappearing, which I think less bees is always good. Sorry. Like, have you ever been out on a picnic or something? I'm like, less bees is good. But apparently, bees is a big deal because they pollinate so much of our plant life. And what we find out is just something as simple as missing bees can be devastating to our ecosystem. So there's a name for this. And so it's a startling reminder of our finely tuned balance of all things. Disappearing bees. Well, this is a startling reminder of the finely tuned balance of all of our systems in this earth. For instance, plants exhale oxygen, right? This is not an accident. That plants exhale the oxygen and we exhale carbon dioxide. They inhale carbon dioxide. We literally are working together. We give each other air. That's not an accident, that's design. Food source. The plants not only give us oxygen, but they give us a food source. Through photosynthesis, we have the idea that the sunlight creates this system where rain and soil, and there's a chemical reaction called photosynthesis, and this feeds us. Without photosynthesis, we don't eat, because the cows eat you're like, well, no, I am a meat eater. No, but the cows ate the grass. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the food source is photosynthesis. So both our breathing and our food depend on plant life. And then in turn, we're breathing exactly what they need. So the disappearing bees in the worldwide decline of entomofauna, that's a new word for me, entomofauna. A decline in entomofauna indicates that the loss of insects would collapse the Earth's ecosystems. So we see these really interesting systems that depend on each other's harmonious work. Billions of things are happening at a microscopic level, all important to sustaining life. The balance of this planet is exquisite and simply impossible. Consider the water cycles. I have a little video. Put the water cycles up there. Yeah, look at that. It's not random. Evaporation becomes clouds, becomes rain, precipitation hits the mountains. And then even the water rolling through mountains actually purifies the water. It's like a natural, cleaning system. We buy water filters, but The earth actually already, you would think it just gets muddy and dirty, but no, it doesn't. God designed it so that it's actually cleaning the water. The electromagnetic coupling, I'm going to just give a couple of things here real quick of things that rely upon each other. The electromagnetic coupling constant binds electrons to protons in atoms. You're like, what? If it was smaller, this coupling. If it was smaller, fewer electrons could be held. If it was larger, electrons would be held too tightly to bond with other atoms. So scientists agree that this is so finely tuned that if you moved it 1 or 2%, the universe would cease to exist as we know it. It's that important that it's so finely tuned. And this is what that guy was talking about with the math and the numbers. Ratio of electron to proton mass is 1 to 1.1836. Again, if this was larger or smaller, molecules could not form, and there wouldn't be no universe. Wouldn't be any universe. Carbon and oxygen nuclei have finely tuned energy levels. If they were not charged properly, one positive, one negative, we would overload on carbon in moments or not have enough to sustain carbon-based life, one or the other. Electromagnetic and gravitational forces are so finely tuned that if they were to change too much in the universe, change much at all, stars could not be stable. Our sun is the right color. Did you know that? If it was a little redder or a little bluer, there would be no photosynthetic response, and it would be insufficient to sustain life. Our sun, our galaxy, our solar system is perfect for sustaining life. Our sun is also the right mass. If it was larger, its brightness would change too quickly and there would be too much high energy radiation. If it was smaller, the range of planetary distances able to support life would be too narrow. The right distance would be so close to the star that tidal forces would disrupt the planet's rotation. So the sun is the exact right size, the exact right color, and the exact right distance from the Earth. Accident? I think not. The Earth's distance from the sun is crucial for stable water cycle. Too far away and the water would freeze, too close and the water would boil. Earth's gravity, axial tilt, rotation, magnetic field, crust thickness, oxygen to nitrogen ratio, carbon dioxide, water vapor, and ozone levels are all just right. Move them around just a few percent and life ceases. The Anthropic Principle is part of what I'm talking about here. That's the principle that they use to describe the finely tuned universe. And the surprising and exceptional constraint upon numbers observed in nature, even the slightest change, would have catastrophic impacts on the universe. Physicist John Wheeler writes this: "It is not only that man is adapted to the universe is adapted to man. A life-giving factor lies at the center of the whole machinery and design of the world." A life-giving factor exists at the center. This is an atheist. He says there's a life-giving factor here. What's the life-giving factor? It's God. The universe isn't adapted to man, it's created for man. And that's what they're seeing. And the man fits perfectly in it. In an article titled, "Here's What Would Happen to Life on Earth If the Moon Disappeared." Turns out the moon isn't just a beacon of light in the night sky. Its existence is crucial to the delicate balancing act that makes life on Earth possible. We need a moon. They say that the moon is just a chip off the old block. So the idea of the moon among scientists is this, that the Earth was just sitting here and something about the size of Mars hit it, and it chipped off the moon. These are the smartest minds in the world came up with this one. I don't know if you're like me and you're just like, what? But it's perfectly round. That's not a chip. I've hit rocks before together. They don't come out perfectly round. And then there's always a hole where you took the rock out. Where's the moon-sized hole? It's very odd. The moon was obviously created, and we know God did this. He made a larger light and a lesser light in the sky. But there's some interesting things about the moon that you might not know. Without the moon, we couldn't sustain life. Its gravity constantly expands and contracts the Earth, necessary to keep life existing. It's why the Earth isn't getting colder from the inside. The moon is the exact right orbit. But consider this mathematical miracle of the moon. Do you know you only see one side of the moon? There's the side we see, and then there's the dark side. I just want you to consider that for a second. That's just God showing off. There's this huge ball rotating around our Earth while we rotate, while we go around the sun. There's a lot of moving parts there. There's moon orbiting, sun, earth orbiting, earth spinning, moon spinning, and somehow mathematically, it's so exact that we always see the exact same face of the moon no matter where you are on the earth. That's weird. Does anybody find that weird? I just think that's God showing off. I don't know. I see that kind of math and I go, that's God just showing off. This is true of billions of finely tuned laws and systems, all of which is way too many for me to mention to you tonight. But there's so many finely tuned laws and systems that make all this work. All these elements are necessary, to which any single one of them turned up by 1 to 5%, turned up or down by 1 to 5%, and life would not be possible here on this planet. Finely tuned universe. Next place I want to go is the mathematical proof. There's a number called the golden ratio. It's also referred to as God's fingerprint. It was originally studied by renowned mathematicians in ancient Greece, Pythagoras and Euclid, where we get the Euclidean math that we model today. And the idea of the golden ratio is that we keep finding a number all the way back to then. Throughout creation, there's a mathematical number that just keeps showing up. And they call it God's fingerprint because a creator might leave a clue like this. And this number is called phi. And I want to show you kind of how we get there right now. It's also called the golden ratio or the divine proportion. It is the number 1.618, and then it actually goes on and on and on. It's almost like God left us a little clue, though, like a mystery. Hey, for you mathematicians, I want to show you that I'm creating all this. It starts with something called the Fibonacci Sequence, and I can explain that to you real quick. Fibonacci numbers start with 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 plus 3 is 8, 8 plus 5 is 13. So you're always adding the number behind you to the number you just have in order to get the next number. So the Fibonacci sequence looks like this: 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, it goes on. Now the ratio between 55 and 34 is the same as between 8 and 5 or between 5 and 3. There's a proportion there, and that number is 1.618. And they found that this number is pretty much in all of creation, from the smallest to the largest things. I'll go through just a few of them. As a proportion, we see it in a leaf. You show a leaf. Get the leaf? Show me the leaf. Fib leaf. There it is. So the distance between these little ribs that come out that form a leaf perfectly form the golden ratio on how that leaf is growing. Mathematicians were like, that's weird. Number of flower petals are Fibonacci numbers. Show me. If I just hit it, if I start talking about it, just show it. Yeah, there you go. Remember, one of the Fibonacci numbers was 5, but you could find that there's flowers. The lily has 3 petals. Buttercups have 5. The chicories have 21. Daisies have 34, and so on. They're Fibonacci numbers. Phi appears in the petals on account of what they call ideal packing arrangement, as selected by Darwinian process. In other words, the perfect way for a plant to grow is using this sequence, this Fibonacci sequence. It's the most efficient way a plant can grow. That's by design. God would do it in the most efficient way, wouldn't he? So they call this ideal packing. Most of the seed patterns, here's not just flowers either, but there's the sunflower seed pattern. That's the Fibonacci spiral. You notice there's those sequence numbers there, 34 and 21. Seeds tend to follow these patterns. There's the seed formation, also the pine cone. Just keep calling for them. This is the same spiral, the Fibonacci sequence. The pineapple grows in a Fibonacci sequence. 8, 13, and 21. A lot of fruits and vegetables, cauliflowers included. And so there is a part of the ratio is a parabolic curve that creates a spiral. So we're going to show the Fibonacci spiral here. As a spiral, we see the Fibonacci perfectly displayed in many created things. It's in galaxies. There's the seeds one again. Seashells, the way plants grow. Hurricanes. They all follow this exact mathematical equation. Phi, the golden ratio. Black holes, ocean waves as they fall. People surf. Look at this. It's an exact Fibonacci number. You see the little boxes with the squares? So the first box in the center is 1, and then it goes 1, and then it goes 3, and then it goes 5, and then it goes 8, and it goes 13. That's why the boxes keep getting progressively bigger. That's what forms the spiral that they're talking about. Proportions in tree branches. Are you bored yet? Look at this. The way a tree grows is that ideal packing. It's the perfect way for a tree to grow is a Fibonacci sequence. It is the golden ratio, and it gives us the ratios of Phi, the fingerprint of God. Look at your finger. 2 joints, 3 sections, 5 fingers. These are Fibonacci numbers. The distance from the ground to your navel and from the navel to the top of your head is 3 to 5. Is that funny? I told a joke. I didn't even know. Ground to the navel, navel to the head. 3 to 5. DNA molecules. They found the DNA molecules, the angstroms long, 34 by 28 angstroms wide, 21. These are Fibonacci numbers. God put his fingerprint on the DNA. Human body, in a article written, A Human Body Mathematical Model Biometric Using Golden Ratio, written by, I'll post the authors online. This was just written in 2017. They studied 35 measurements around the human body and found that they all matched the golden ratio to the minutest of decibel. I have a picture of the Fibonacci body. I tried to find one that was not risky looking. Fib body, go. Yeah, there it is. Look at that. They keep finding Phi everywhere, all the ratios and proportions. The human face is chock full of the golden ratio. Here's a picture of Sylvester Stallone using the Fibonacci ratio. Now, all these proportions are actually accurate on the left side. That our face, our lips, our nose, our eyes, they all follow the Fibonacci proportions. From measurements to the chin, to the nose, to the lips, to the eyes, to the hairline, to the head. Now, if you were considering random mutations as the source of life, put that picture back up there. If you're considering the random mutations as the source of life, just if you believed in Darwinian evolution, the picture on the right is far more likely to be what we would look like. It's still got eyes, it's still functional, it's still better. But as you can see, that's what random mutations might look like. On the left side, we see that's a designer. Right? Adrian! Look at the Mona Lisa. See, artists have been using the Fibonacci sequence for a long time. They've been using the golden ratio. They find that the Mona Lisa fits perfectly. The spiral. The Eiffel Tower is another one. They used the ratios to create the Eiffel Tower. Most works of art that we find beautiful, because beauty is often seen when we see this ratio that we haven't measured it, but somehow our eyes know that's pretty, that's beautiful. Eiffel Tower. Many works of art, the David. I found this one interesting. Bees. All bees in a colony, if you divide the number of females by the number of males, the number is the golden ratio 1.618. Even in the microscopic realm is not immune to Fibonacci, to the golden ratio, to the fingerprint of God. In the Bible, the golden ratio is used. 1.618 is the proportions of the Ark of the Covenant. It was measuring 1.5 by 2.5. The altar was the golden ratio, 1.618. 3 by 5. Noah's Ark was 30 cubits by 50 cubits. It's almost like God's just teasing us. He's like, I'm going to use this number out here. I'm going to show you the number in the Bible too. When I want the Ark of the Covenant made, the altar, Noah's Ark. Okay, we're going to move on from Fibonacci in case you're kind of done with math. We're going to go on to a case for intelligent design. And God said, we know let there be light, that light is fundamental to the universe in the Big Bang, that light is both particle and wave. It's a fantastic thing that light is, and it sets the speed limit for the universe speed, right? 186,000 miles per second, the speed of light. But when we rewind a little bit, we know, and God said, let there be light. I mentioned last week how Bernard Hayes, the author of God Theory, got born again when he remembered the phrase, let there be light, having discovered that he believed that all of creation is fundamentally rests on the idea of light. And he's an astrophysicist. And when he did that, he got born again. He got born again because he was like, oh my gosh, the Bible's true. Anyways, let's rewind a little bit, though. And God said, that's where it started, right? He spoke. He spoke the worlds into existence. So this is kind of new information that what do we know about atoms in the unseen world? They're finding out now that atoms are vibrating. The very smallest part of an atom is called the quark. And what gives its energy is that it's doing that. And this vibration creates something called zero-point field. Say zero-point field. Zero-point field is the measurable hum of the universe from all the vibrating things. In fact, when I speak, that voice that I just spoke vibrates for eternity. That's science. And it adds to the zero-point field. Even though we stop hearing it, you can't hear the zero-point field. There is a detectable hum when they use very, very sensitive equipment to measure things like space, sound, things in the atmosphere. They find that there's something humming that's adding a numerical value to what they're sensing, and they can measure everything else away, and they still find this baseline, and they call it the zero-point field. There's a hum. Strike a bell, and it vibrates. How long does it vibrate? How long does it sustain? Dong! Why does the universe not run out of batteries? That's part of my question here. Why does it not run out of batteries? Why does the sun not run out of batteries? Why does the earth not run out of batteries? Why does the molecules not run out of batteries? They're powered, but why do they not run out of power? According to an article written by Tam Hunt in the University of California in November of 2018, ultimately all matter is just vibrations of various underlying fields. As such, at every scale, all of nature vibrates. So this is, thank you. Oh, we were fighting over it, but you won. Thank you for that. This is nothing more than vibrating molecules. I know it feels solid, but what makes it solid is that on the microscopic level, it's just like molecules or atoms going like this, vibrating. And that motion and connection creates what we call matter. In Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 3, the Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. When God said, everything's still vibrating, and his word sustains all matter. The energy inside of an atom, if released, the energy inside of an atom that you can't see, is so little. If you release the energy inside that atom, it's E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass, the mass of that atom. Almost unmeasurable, but we remember the atomic mass or the atomic numbers of the chemical chart. The mass of that atom times the speed of light squared, E equals mc squared, is the energy that's in that atom. Well, we found out what that is when we split an atom and it blew up a city. It's called a nuclear bomb, right? That's how much energy is in atoms. An atom has that much power. Think about our 1.5 volt batteries, or our 12 volt batteries that start our cars. God puts that kind of power in, almost immeasurable power, inside of a little particle. That's the power of God. He packs it all in there. That's incredible. I don't know if I get excited about that stuff. Have you ever heard of the protein laminin? Anyone? All right, well, I'll tell you about it. A pastor named Louis Giglio in 2008 preached a message that sent laminin into the Hall of Fame fun fact, take it for what you want. Laminin is a glycoprotein that acts like a glue in our cells. So it holds us all together. Colossians chapter 1 and verse 17. He, Christ, is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So the glue inside of you, laminin, this glycoprotein, looks like this. Survey says? No. Hit that laminin. Put the laminin on there. Laminin. It was? Did you guys see it? It's the cross. It was a cross. It's a cross. Just right when I looked away, too. It's shaped like a cross. That's like God just having fun with us. And he makes it the glue that holds it all together. Now, I'm a strict believer in the Bible. When I say strict believer, I believe what the Word of God says exactly the way it says it. I believe it's full of depth. Now, it says right before the Ten Commandments, it says, God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days. In 6 days, God created, he says it twice, in 6 days, God created them. So I used to think that God created the heavens and the earth, and then there was like millions of years, and then God started creating light and doing stuff. That's what I used to think. To kind of explain the geology and the dating of this world and how everything's dates old. Fossils date old, rocks date old. And I was just kind of, that's what I thought. But then someone pointed out to me, no, look right here in this scripture. It says in 6 days he created them. So I'm that guy. I'm just telling you right now, I'm the guy that believes in the 6,000-year-old earth. I believe in exactly what the Bible says. And so you might say, what about carbon dating? So I want to talk about it. Making a case for an intelligent creator in a 6,000-year-old earth. My desire here is only to show you that carbon dating is not an exact science, that an old fossil date doesn't give a legitimate argument to discredit God. I'm going to show you 2 reasons why, maybe 3. Carbon dating is done, I'm going to explain how it's done. It's done by measuring radiocarbon, it's called C14, in a fossil. How much C14, radiocarbon, is left in a fossil can help determine how old it is if they have a baseline that they can assume how much should have been in there when it died, and then how much is left all these thousands of years later. So the radioactive isotope called radiocarbon is formed naturally in the upper atmosphere through something called cosmogenic radiation, but I'll explain it to you right now. The creation of carbon, radiocarbon. Let me show a slide here. There's photons of light hitting, there you go. The sun shoots photons of light hitting regular carbon. And it spins off a proton, and it becomes radioactive carbon. Radioactive carbon, bad. Regular carbon, good. But that radioactive carbon gets into our CO2. And radioactive, you know what radiation does to all of us, right? It's bad for us. It ages us and causes us to eventually die. So radioactive carbon has gotten into our food source because the sun hit carbon, spun off a protein, that carbon got into the plant life, got breathed in, and then we ate the plant or the cow that ate the plant, and so now radioactive carbon has gotten into our burgers and our broccoli. You understand? Whatever you eat has got radioactive carbon in it. They haven't figured out how to get that out, so there you're stuck eating radioactive food. So carbon dating is accomplished by measuring how much C14 is left as it decays over time. C14 decays at a rate of half of what's in it in 5,675 years. So if you have C14, so C14 goes in your bones. And if I find your bone 10,000 years from now, and you started with 20 radioactive carbon C14s in you, let's just say there's 20. Then after 10, 5,600 years went by, and then after, now you only have 10 C14s left. But then you cut that in half, and now you only have 5 C14s left. That means you're 10,000 years old. So then if you were to cut that in half from 5, you'd have 2.5 radiocarbons left, and then you could say, okay, that's 15,000 years. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's called a half-life. And you can take a half-life down as far as you want because you can go from 20 to 10, then 10 to 5, then 10, 5 to 2.5, but then you can go from 2.5 to 1.125, and then you can go from 1.125. You can just go on in the fractions and smaller. You can get to 0.0000006, and then 0.0000003. And it'll just keep getting smaller. So you can measure it for millions of years. Half-life of C14. Now, according to radiocarbon dating, an archaeological perspective, written by Taylor in 1987, on page 133, radiocarbon dating measurements produces ages in radiocarbon years, which must be converted to calendar ages by a process called calibration. So when they find an old bone and they measure it, and they measure how much C14 is left in it, then they have to use a process called calibration. It's needed because the atmospheric C12 to C14 ratio, which is a key element in calculating radiocarbon ages, has not been constant historically. In other words, the C14 that's in the plants 10,000 years ago would be different than how much C14 is in the plants now. So it's hard to guess how much C14 was supposed to be starting in that bone when it died. So if you're going to guess 100 million years old, they have no idea how much carbon was on the Earth 100 million years ago. So they have no baseline to measure how much carbon-14 should be left in that bone. So they're using today's baseline to measure things that they believe are hundreds of millions of years old, which is silly. It really is, because if you think about it, that's nuts. They've only been measuring carbon-14 in today's atmosphere since 1955. So they have a very small number to work with that they're trying to apply to the entire history of the Earth. So they know that that's a problem for them. But has the rate of C14 always been the same? So if the sun is creating C14 out of carbon at a certain rate, and the plants are eating that or ingesting it and becoming part of the plant life, then eventually there should be what's called equilibrium reached. The rate at which the sun is creating C14 should match the same amount that the plants are absorbing, and then it shouldn't be increasing or decreasing. It should always be pretty constant, but it does increase and decrease because seasons and orbits and things like that. But it should be pretty close to constant. It should reach equilibrium if nothing's changed in the atmosphere. So I propose this. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 6. And God said, let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water. Wait, what? Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water. So God's creating the earth, and he puts water in the stratosphere. Besides the water in the oceans, he puts some extra water up in the stratosphere. He says, so God made the vault and separated the waters under the vault from the water above it. There's water up here and water on the earth. And it was so. And God called the vault sky. So the space between the ocean and the water in the upper atmosphere is called sky. There was water up there before the flood. It was called a firmament. And that water did what? It stopped the sun from making C14. It stopped the photons from spinning off protons off our carbon and making it radioactive. That is why people could live 1,000 years. They weren't eating radioactive food. Adam lived 930 years. He wasn't eating radioactive food. He didn't have no C14 in his plant life. Okay, so from the time of Adam to Noah, people were living almost 1,000 years. Boom, the flood happens. Noah lived 950 years. Abraham died 10 generations later at 175 years. 10 generations later, people were no longer living 900 years. They were living 175 years. 7 more generations later, Moses dies at the age of 120. And I believe this is about the time that we reached equilibrium, because nowadays people don't really go past 115. We have some 118ers. It's pretty rare somebody gets up that high. But God promised man 120 years, so I believe equilibrium reached about 900 years after the flood is when equilibrium on C14 creation reached its constant, which means we don't live 1,000 years, we live 120 years maximum, because we keep eating radioactive food. So here's my theory. If something lived and created bones, which we know when God created and let the seas teem, he created a lot of animals, like right off the bat, boom, a lot of stuff. Just a couple people, Adam and Eve, but lots of animals and stuff. Those animals would have lived as well under that very low C14 levels, which means their bones would have almost no C14 in them at all, if any. Right? Their starting point was almost 0 C14. So if a scientist found a bone like that and was applying today's baseline to it, they would go, my gosh, this is 500 million years old, based on how much C14 is in it. But to us, we're like, oh, that bone came before the flood, that's all. Then The flood hits, and now the ramping of C14 begins to increase over time until it reaches equilibrium. It took 900 years to get there. So anything that lived between the time of equilibrium and the flood, closer to the flood, have very little C14, but by the time 900 years is up, have a lot of C14. If that's true, then you could assume that there'd be a gap or a speeding up of you'd have missing fossils. You'd have a ton of missing fossils you'd have like this, because you'd have stuff that was hundreds of millions of years old, and then the flood hits, and then all of a sudden you have a couple of things that are 100 million years old, and you have just 900 years worth of plant life, or some animals that, were slowly ramping up into just until you get to 6,000 years old, which is, 4,000 years old, 3,000 years old, 2,000 years old. There'd be a gap. So there was a gap. Creation then could easily look like the 500 million year old Cambrian explosion. So if God created things that have very little C14 in them, and we had a Cambrian explosion, they talk about the Cambrian explosion. It's like the scientists go, man, it just seems like life exploded here all of a sudden. It doesn't even make sense. They can't figure out how fast all these plants, or not all these plants, but all these animals suddenly just burst onto the scene. They call it the Cambrian explosion. That's creation. That's God creating the animals. Okay, so I'm going to read a couple things for you. The seemingly rapid appearance of fossils in the primordial strata was noted by William Buckland in the 1840s, and in his 1859 book on the origin of species, Charles Darwin discussed the then inexplicable lack of earlier fossils as one of the main difficulties for his theory of descent with slow modification through natural selection. In other words, they're missing fossils. The long-running puzzlement about the seemingly sudden appearance of the Cambrian fauna without evident precursors, like where did all this life come from, centers on three key points. Whether there really was a mass diversification of complex organisms over a relatively short period of time, like when God said, let the earth bring forth animals, was a mass diversification of complex organisms over a short period of time during the early Cambrian what might have caused such a rapid change and what would imply about the origin of animal life. So the fossil record is showing what creation shows. According to an article called The Great Unconformity, written May of 2020 by Harrison Tassoff, published in the UC Santa Barbara, a billion-year gap in the fossil record was first noticed by John Wesley Powell in 1869 in the layers of the Grand Canyon. The Great Unconformity, as it's known, accounts for more than a billion years of missing rocks in certain places. So they're missing fossils. So they don't teach you this in high school or college. They don't want to tell you about the holes in their theory, but there's a massive hole. They have a huge problem that they're dealing with because they're missing a lot of stuff. And so they call this Darwin's big dilemma, but I believe Darwin's big dilemma was simply caused by the flood. A sudden growth in C14 from nearly zero to its rate today over a short period of 900 years would leave a tremendous gap in fossils. It would just leave a gap. And that's the gap that they're talking about, as well as a massive amount of strata missing and an ice age. In December of 1999, James Trefil in the Smithsonian Magazine published an article titled, When the Earth Froze Over. Here it is posited that on 2 occasions the Earth was covered entirely by ice. Evidence pulled from Africa, even the equator, finding geological material transported through what is the article called extreme weathering. They said there was extreme weathering. Yeah, it's called a flood. That would be extreme weathering. A few questions they cannot answer. Number 1, what would cause the Earth to freeze over? And number 2, how did life survive? The Noah's Ark explains both of these. So how did everything freeze over? Well, the first freezing over would happen when God created the heavens and the earth, but there was no sun yet. The oceans would have been frozen, so there's a huge ice age happening there. But God can cause the oceans to not be frozen because he's God at any time he wants. But I think that it started out frozen because there's no sun and it's just frozen. First ice age. Then boom, Cambrian explosion happens, boom. Then the second ice age happened right after the flood. What do I mean? When the flood happened, there was no sunlight over the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Now that would have caused the temperatures to drop extremely low. And we all know what it is to live near the ocean, not live near the ocean, but be by the ocean, because the temperature drops about 20 degrees from just a few miles inland. So when it's all ocean water and it's all clouds, if you were to drop the average temperature of the earth by 30 or 40 degrees in 1 year, you would have yourself an ice age. Now, the ice age of the second one only brought ice all the way down to about Wisconsin, Arizona. But we do know for sure, just from living in Arizona, if you've ever been to science camp in Payson, you can find saltwater fossils embedded in the rocks. And you're like, how was the ocean water here? I know how. There was a flood. We know that the waters used to cover the earth. And so I just see carbon dating gets kind of beat up pretty bad when it comes to the idea of a flood. Carbon dating scientists know that it's a lot of guesswork. I got to close with this. I realized I'm really going long. But the carbon dating scientists concede that it is still the best system they have. In an article published in June of 2018 called at Cornell University called Inaccuracies in Radiocarbon Dating, they said this: radiocarbon dating is a key tool archaeologists use to determine the age of plants and objects made with organic material. But new research shows that commonly accepted radiocarbon dating standards can miss the mark, calling into question historical timelines. Now that's the world talking about their own system, saying it's not really working. In Ken Ham's The Answers book, he shows a few examples where carbon dating was severely flawed. For instance, bones of a saber-toothed tiger, which they believed were extinct at 100 million years ago, they found dated to 28,000 years. A freshly killed seal, dated using carbon-14, showed it died 1,300 years ago. A living mollusk shell was dated at 2,300 years old. And some very unusual evidence in that living snails' shells showed that they had died 27,000 years ago. So they know that there's problems. And so I would just simply say this to you: if you're an atheist and you believe there's no God because of a bone that dates millions of years old, you are hinging your eternal existence on very poor science. Don't believe in that anymore. We know there's holes in radiocarbon dating. Could God have done it however he wanted to? Right? I've poked some holes in the reliability of carbon dating here. I was in my Bible college class at Fuller maybe 10 years ago. And the question came up. Joshua commanded the sun to stop in this battle that he was fighting. And he said this for the sun to stop and the moon to stop. And so then it came out in the class that that's impossible. Because if the sun had stopped, then the earth would have, people would have been jolted from the motion, because the earth would have stopped spinning in order to make the sun stop. The earth stopped spinning and we all would have flown forward because of the speed of the earth suddenly stopping. There'd have been a problem, and the waves of the ocean and then the tides would have all gotten messed up and everything would have happened. And they were all talking about how this is impossible. And I raised my hand in the class, and the teacher finally goes, "Yes, Mr. Anderson." And I said, "So we're all talking about God here, right?" The room got kind of quiet. And I was like, "So I'm pretty sure God understands the law of physics, and if he wants to stop the sun, he could do it without consequence, right? He's God." It was very quiet in the room. You're talking about Christians. So why are we always trying to be logical when it comes to God? He's God. He can do things however he wants. He does the impossible things every day. If he wants to create the earth with billions of years of age, he can. He could create it however he wants. He could have created all of this yesterday. He could have, and he could have given you all the memories that brought you up to this point, and he could have put in all the books in the libraries, and he could have done all that yesterday, and we would have no idea. Because you know why? Because he's God. And he could do it however he wants to do it. So the idea that science could disprove God is ridiculous to me. It doesn't make any sense. So if he wants to create it in 6 days, even though that the rocks show that they're billions of years old or whatever, he can. He didn't make Adam as a baby. He didn't make a little baby Adam. He made Adam with age. He created everything with age. So he probably created, so I want to talk about something called time dilation. Time dilation is this. This is really good. Okay, so are you guys in? Are you guys in for a few more minutes? Okay. If you were to take a clock and stick it on top of a mountain, and you take another clock and synchronize it to it and stick it on the beach, it wouldn't be long until those clocks had different time. The closer you are to Earth, the slower time moves. That's scientific fact. It's called time dilation. Time is not constant. It moves. So there's a man that looked into Einstein's theory of relativity included time dilation. And he wrote a book called The Science of God. His name is Gerald Schroeder, and he really groundbreaking stuff here about 10 years ago that he wrote. He's a college teacher, Jewish studies, and this is what he said. He said that when the speed of a relative motion is at a high fraction of speed of light, observers in different coordinate systems will measure entirely different amounts of lapse time on their clocks. In other words, if you're moving super fast, you're going to have a way different time than someone standing still. Time will change. They'll have different rates of time. The experience of how much time I have versus the experience of time you might have. The closer you are to Earth, remember, the Earth here in this case would be way more stationary, would be very, very slow time, and then moving at the speed of the Big Bang, universe is exploding into space and moving, that where God was while it was exploding, he would have been at the center of the universe when it was creating, and not on Earth. So the first day, this guy mathematically found that the first day would have been 7 billion Earth years. Based on where God was, it would have been 24 hours for him, but the Earth would have went through 7 billion years. That's what this guy figured out. He said, because time's not constant. That was interesting to me. So if he did that, he said the second day was 3.5 billion years. The third day would have been 2 billion years to God, to Earth, but 1 day for God. And so on and so forth. It gets us pretty close to 13.8 billion years. Isn't that interesting? I thought that was groundbreaking. When I read the book years ago, I was like, that could be it too. Because he's God, and he can create it however he wants. We can't let carbon dating derail that. Where are the dinosaurs? Dinosaurs are in the Bible, by the way. They're in the book of Job. You can find the Brontosaurus and the Leviathan, the sea creature. Reptiles never stop growing. We have dinosaurs still on the planet today. They're called elephants, rhinoceroses, crocodiles, alligators, Komodo dragons. We still have them. Dinosaurs are not extinct. They just stopped getting so big because reptiles never stopped growing, and a lot of them did die off. Reptiles are the only species that never stops growing, and so you would get very, very, very large reptiles. When people lived 1,000 years, reptiles got big. How did Noah fit them on the ark? I'm kind of going through like a machine gun here. Most dinosaurs are actually small, about the size of a chicken. Big dinosaurs are small for the first 5 years of their life. It's already been discussed and mathematically proven thousands of times that all of the kinds of animals would have fit on the ark. They can't take that away from us anymore, though they've tried. How could all the animals fit on the ark was a book written by Michael Belkin and Tim Sheffey. And one of the things they came up with is that there was about 6,744 total kinds of animals, because you wouldn't bring all the dogs, you just bring one kind of dog. Out of the dogs comes lots of dogs. We know that there's 1 million kinds of dogs, but you just bring one pair of dogs, and then all the other ones are in there. And so also all the kinds of animals were put on board, and using 3D modeling of the inside of the ark, there was 1.8 million cubic feet on the ark, the space of 450 semi-truck trailers. See, look at all the research I do. Then there is enough room to fit all the animals onto the ark, accounting also for storage space for food, and there's still room left over. And that's all I got to say about that. Look at that, exactly 1 hour. Thank you, streamers, for watching. Thank you guys so much. Father God, I thank you, Lord, for this knowledge that we got. I know it was a lot, Lord, that we went through, but we looked at your design. We looked at your creation, Father God, and it is magnificent. We give you thanks and praise for all that we have, the air that we breathe, the food that we have, the life that we live. That we are thankful to you, Father God, for these things. And I pray for every single person within the sound of my voice tonight. Lord, your hand is upon them. That your peace is flooding their soul. That, Lord, that your love is poured deep into their heart, that things are going well for them. You're blessing them as they go in, as they come out. That your joy is reigning in their hearts, that every day they're able to get up and say, this is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice in it. God bless you guys. You are dismissed. Have a great night. Next week, we are not doing this